Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I arrived late to the Andy Weir hype train. I first saw The Martian well after it had left theaters, and I read the book about a year after that. I loved them both dearly, so when I saw that Weir's latest novel was getting the adaptation treatment, I made sure to jump on board early this time. And after having gotten the chance to see it at an early screening, I'm here to tell you, I was not disappointed. In fact, I was blown away. So sit down and settle in for my spoiler-free review of Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. Before we dive into my thoughts on the film, I thought it would be useful to give a quick plot synopsis so we're all on the same page moving forward. Everything I'm about to say has either been covered in the trailers or by the movie's social media synopsis, so no worries there. Dr. Ryland Grace is a scientist who's been tapped to figure out why the stars across the sky, including Sol, are dimming. He's been attached to a global initiative known as Project Hail Mary, whose intent is to travel to the star Tau Ceti, which seems to be immune to whatever is happening. Arriving alone, he wakes up with amnesia, and must figure out the reason behind Tau Ceti's immunity, as well as handle humanity's first contact with intelligent life, a being he names Rocky, who is there for precisely the same reason as he is. All good? Alright, let's jump in. The first thing I want to get out of the way is that I was in the second row of an IMAX screening, so any issues I might mention with the camera work or CG, please take it with a big grain of salt. That being said, even with that working against me, this movie was still gorgeous, and made the crick in my neck well worth it by the end. I'd like to make special mention of the opening sequences where Ryan Gosling's Ryland Grace, just this second realized they have the same initials, is woken up from a coma on board the Hail Mary. The camera work here perfectly mimics his mental state, with its odd angles and quick cuts leaving the audience disoriented and trying to find a toehold, just as Grace himself is doing the same. It feels very deliberate in a way a lot of films don't these days. More often than not, cinematography has become somewhat rote, with DPs just going with what worked before because, well, it worked before. Project Hail Mary kind of shuns those preconceptions, walking its own path, even if the path can, at times, get a little muddy. As an example, there are several sequences in this film that take place in a geodesic media room on board the Hail Mary that I was struggling to figure out, even after that initial disorientation I mentioned previously had long since passed. In addition to this, the EVA scenes can get a little hard to keep track of at times, but I wrote those ones off because they're very clearly meant to be disorienting. Now, there is no doubt in my mind that Andy Weir researched exhaustively for this novel. His work on The Martian bears out that he knows what he's talking about. But as I watched Project Hail Mary, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching more Star Wars than 2001: A Space Odyssey. Now, this is not a bad thing. I want to make that clear right now. In fact, if it doesn't at least get the nod for the Oscar in cinematography, I'll be very surprised. It just required me to reframe the movie on the fly, and I figured I'd let you guys know in case the same thing happens to you. Let me explain what I mean. If we look at The Martian, the film mind you, everything in it feels grounded in reality. Mark Watney's actions, the challenges he has to overcome, the science behind it all feels very plausible. Project Hail Mary, on the other hand, feels like it takes a lot more liberties with the science. And no, I'm not just referring to Rocky. The first time I noticed it was when Grace gets into the pilot seat for the first time and begins to move the Hail Mary. If we compare this sequence to the way that the crew of the Ares had to maneuver their ship to pick up Watney and the Martian, we can see that it's night and day. Physics kind of takes a back seat here in favor of the joke of Grace trying to get some distance from the alien who he thinks might be hostile. Now, I will say that while the science is much more thoroughly worked out in the book, which I appreciate, the movie left me feeling like it went a little more Hollywoody than it otherwise could have. Again, all of this works, and is done so beautifully that it gives the movie an identity all its own, instead of just feeling like a Martian rehash. I just wasn't expecting it. Now, you all knew this was going to happen. The comparisons were inevitable, and honestly, I'm not sure that wasn't by design. We've got a pair of adorable aliens that will be fighting for their places on the screen, in our hearts, and in our LEGO collections. That last one is especially important given how damn expensive LEGOs have gotten. Now, from what I remember of the book, Rocky is an extremely talented engineer. Not just by Earth standards, but by the standards of his homeworld as well. He's the best of the best, and he's over 100 years old. This dude knows his shit. So, when I tell you it feels like they infantilized him to make him cuter for the audience, you'll know exactly what I mean. This goes beyond Rocky geeking out about all the new tech and sites that are on board the Hail Mary, and it goes beyond his initial interactions with Grace. I loved that little dude, but too often it felt like Grace was interacting with a small child rather than a century-old engineer on the cutting edge of his species' science and technology. It comes down to the little things, like how he's constantly tripping over himself, or how he's always so energetic at all times. It was exactly as effective as it needed to be, but after a certain point, I felt like I was being pandered to a little bit, and it started to grate on me. And in the midst of this feeling came the thought, is this film trying to compete with The Mandalorian? Rocky is more than his endearing personality, and I feel like having him compete with Grogu sells his character short. Now, I am aware that these films are not mutually exclusive, and just because you see one doesn't mean you can't go see the other. But this is exactly the type of binary equation that Hollywood uses when trying to force an IP to come out on top of the pile. I don't know. I might be wrong here. Let me know what you think down in the comments, but this is just what I was thinking as I watched it. And this is on top of the fact that Grace's friendship with Rocky felt, I don't know, I guess rushed would be the most appropriate word. Like, I wanted to live with them a little longer. Wanted to be in their world, explore the day in, day out of it all, just a touch more. This isn't to say that what we got wasn't effective. I just feel like they hit exclusively the highs and kind of buried the lows just to keep the plot moving forward. Honestly, I'm not even sure if you could change it without destroying the movie's pacing, and I'll always have the book, but it's just something that I was thinking about after I left the theater. One of the things that I noticed as I continued to watch the film was that Grace's amnesia was actually fairly poorly communicated. During his time on the Hail Mary, we explore a series of flashbacks depicting the circumstances that led up to him being deployed to Tau Ceti. We learn the ins and outs of the situation just as Grace does as time goes on. The issue that I have is that these feel like basic flashbacks, not the returning memories of an amnesiac. Either route is perfectly acceptable as a storytelling device, it just needs to remain consistent throughout the narrative. The opening half hour or so does a perfectly fine job of communicating this, with Grace reacting to these flashbacks with appropriate gravitas. But, as time goes on, and Grace begins to remember more and more, we don't really see him reacting to his memories in any significant way. There are no moments of revelation that make him question everything he thought he knew. Don't get me wrong, it's not like everything he remembers is going to be like that, but we, the audience, need to remember that he's learning this stuff right along with us. It's a quibble in the grand scheme of things, I know, but if this is the worst I've got to say about this movie, then what does that tell you about the rest of it? Project Hail Mary is an excellent film. I realize that this video has included my nitpicks against it, but please don't misunderstand my comments. I am heartily recommending this movie to anyone and everyone that has even a passing interest in seeing it. These are just a few of the things that I noticed as I watched this phenomenal story of adventure, friendship, heroism, and love. Definitely go see it in IMAX if you can, and in theaters at the very least if nothing else. This is a movie that needs to be experienced on a big-ass screen. But aside from your own enjoyment, it'll help the movie do well. And it'll help keep theaters going at a time when Hollywood execs are really starting to question if theatrical releases are even worth it anymore. Ryan Gosling is in top form. Rocky looks great every moment he's on the screen. The rest of the CG is phenomenal, and the space sequences actively took my breath away. You can do a hell of a lot worse on a date night than going to see this movie. Just try to make sure that your tickets aren't in the second row. Anyway, that's all I've got for you this time, so if you could do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe buttons, I'd really appreciate it. Every little bit really helps me out. Also, head down to the comments and let me know if there's anything you guys would like to see me cover in the future. And while you're at it, go ahead and take a look at the other videos on my channel, or hit up my website to see my blog and maybe check out one of my books on Amazon. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.